James Creedon's awaiting with Media Watch. And James, we're starting with a really harrowing photograph that has emerged of two migrants, a father and his toddler daughter, lying face down dead at the Rio Grande, trying to cross the border from Mexico into the US. And this has gone viral and is causing and raising all sorts of questions about what happens to migrants in the US. That's right. So the photo straight away has been linked to policy, and it's in the headlines straight away. So it's a human image, but it's also a political image in some respects, or at least it's become that. Shocking photo of drowned father and daughter highlights migrants' border peril. So this was taken by Julia Leduc, a journalist with La Jornada, a Mexican newspaper. This was as they were... Well, they drowned, essentially, and you can see that they're arm in arm, essentially, with the T-shirt, the father's T-shirt, kind of binding the two of them together. So it's a heartbreaking image, and it evokes, Mark, it reminds us of the image from 2015 of Aylan Kurdi, the little Syrian refugee boy who was trying to make it to Europe and washed up on the coast of Turkey. That image, because he was face up, was not broadcast by a lot of media, including our own. There was a whole kind of ethical question around the image, but certainly it did highlight the power of photography in instances such as this. And what that was another image actually from not of a dead child in this case, but of a child caught up in the conflict in Aleppo. And again, it elicited a huge amount of emotion and reactions. Now, the Aylan Kurdi case in particular is coming to mind a lot with this very tragic image from the border. That they're kind of being linked in some respects. And the Columbia Journalism Review is having a look at the kind of questions about the impact of an image, Mark. And what's interesting here is they say there's been a lot of reporting in the last few weeks about the conditions in which children are being held in these camps along the border. Some people even using the terminology concentration camp, which is obviously very political, controversial. You've had the Democratic politician Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez using that term. So there's a whole debate around it. But very importantly, there has been a lot of reporting on the conditions in which these children are being held, and those conditions are not great. But actually, this image seems to have cut through a lot of that and had a more powerful impact. So what the Columbia Journalism Review is looking at is whether or not that impact is lasting. And they say in the case of Aylan Kurdi, 3 years down the line, we've had a lot of reporting from about refugee camps in Greece showing that migrant children are living in horrifying conditions. In other words, what they conclude is empathy is important, but not sufficient when it comes to actually changing policy. I'll show you a couple of cartoons in this regard, Mark, because this, as I said, is being really tied to Donald Trump's policies when it comes to very harsh policies when it comes to migration. The American Dream. This is a cartoonist from Mexico, Antonio Rodriguez, and you can see the way in which that image is now being politicized. This is another Mexican cartoonist, and again there you can see a lot of people would, I think, politically take issue with an image like that, but this is what's happening. It's being tied to Trump's policies. Fairly or unfairly, that's just how it's being perceived by many. The zero tolerance policy has been reversed, but clearly this is the legacy of what's become a way of treating migrants, and clearly what we're seeing is something that's unacceptable in anybody's political stance. I think the way children are treated, certainly in the detention centres, and what's happened to this poor father and his child is absolutely heartbreaking. It's rehumanised the debate, I think, clearly. It's put the human being back at the centre of this discussion. No matter where you stand politically, it is heartbreaking. Next, the French Digital Affairs Minister has a plan to tackle fake news. My plan is watch us, because we do proper news. He says that journalists in and of themselves, sort of like doctors have a medical council where peopled by peers, that journalists need to do the same. It needs to be an ethics council. They need to call out fake news. They need to alert their colleagues regarding this. And it wouldn't necessarily have sanctions, but it would have the power to alert the public. Now, who's going to pay them, I wonder? The thing is, what he said also is if the journalists don't do it themselves, the state will intervene. And that's what's got a lot of people's backs up. They're like, hold on a minute, the state will intervene in terms of an ethics council vis-a-vis. Then that becomes censorship, and that raises more questions, doesn't it? There's a grey zone there, and you've had a lot of people making comments in that regard. French government announced its intention to impose on journalists an order that would regulate fake news. People don't like that. This is a researcher at the CNRS Institute here in France. She says this is a threat to democracy, and this
historian, trying to find the historian in question. There was an historian also taking issue with it, and this is a cartoon even pointing to what that could morph into down the track, a form of censorship. That's what people are afraid of. Ethics Council turns into kind of sort of censorship.
Every media organisation should send one person to a committee every month to sit down and discuss it. They keep their same salary to do it that way. Everyone cooperates, everybody does the same thing. That's the way to do it. I shall patent that idea and put it forward.
It would have to be done correctly, I think.
Quick one on the heatwave?
All right.
Quick one, please, James.
Very quickly on this. 2014, we had the TF1 weather report projecting what it was going to look like in 2050, Mark, at the trends at the time. It's actually tomorrow's weather report, basically. And
that's how it's going to be tomorrow.
That's how it's looked tomorrow and in 2019.
And they were saying that would be 2050.
And they were predicting 2050. And I'm going to be cheeky. This is a French meteorologist. This is also tomorrow's weather report. He's a meteorologist, and he was like, actually, the weather report looks like Munch's screen. And it does. I hope we won't literally be screaming tomorrow.
I hope the scream's got some sunscreen on. James, thank you very much. James Creedon with the Media Watch. Great to see you, sir.